Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just Put Paint on It, your daily Tuesday through Friday live talk show on Twitch and or YouTube sometimes, like today, where we sit down and we just put paint on it. We paint, we hobby, and we chat to a veritable who's who's of the hobby community. So introducing my co-hosts for today, we have Mr. Alfarius Matt. Hello, Mr. Alfarius.
Good morning.
Good morning. I hope you're excited about today.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I know we were both girling a little bit about this, which is great. And by a little, I mean a lot. Make sure you check out Matt's store at jacksonqueen.com as well. Then we also brought in the lovely, lovely Tanya Gates. Hello, Tanya.
Hello.
And of course, she is the War Mistress. She streams every Wednesday and Saturday. Make sure you check her out at twitch.tv/the_War Mistress on Twitch for her hobby stream where she paints a lot. More than I do.
I mean, on stream, I really don't paint that much.
And, saving the best for last here, we have what I would consider one of the legends of wargaming, a person who has inspired me for many, many years since I opened White Dwarf, and pretty much like every codex since then until he went to do something with like StarCraft and then a whole bunch of whatnot. But introducing none other than Mr. Andy Chambers. Hello, Mr. Andy Chambers. How are you?
Hi. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited. I've been dreading and loving this day for the last 3 weeks.
Well, you can tell I made a special effort to tidy up my office for you and everything.
You know what? We all have. It's nice to see you have a hobby space as well, and that your hobby space is as loved and as used as our hobby spaces as well, which is fantastic.
This is the reality.
Exactly, right? And of course, we do have the chat. We might have a couple questions from the chat. And it's funny because I went on a few social media platforms and said, hey, if you could ask, Andy Chambers a question, what would it be? And surprisingly enough, a lot of the ones I got was, where is your handlebar mustache? Where did that go? At what point did you decide I've outgrown it?
No, I can put my finger exactly on one that went away because I shaved it off on my 30th birthday, which was October 20th, 1996. So it went away a long time ago. I wasn't actually, I was at Games Workshop for another 8 years after that. But for everyone, it is forever the Lemmy mustache. Oh, and hair, of course.
And the long locks, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Pretty sure that Lemmy saw a picture of you and was like, no, I'm stealing that from him.
No, I stole it from him. I'll admit it. I did it to look like Lemmy.
Oh, that's fantastic. Gear Guts Mech Shop Kyle says, Mr. Chambers, I always loved your orcs and what you did for conversions. I'm assuming that's the Gorka Morka days and things like that as well.
Kind of even before that, to be honest. I mean, Gorka Morka was kind of like a big expression of like, hey! But it came about because we really got into just like bashing around orc vehicles and converting them before that. And it was so commonplace to see really awesome, orc ramshackle machines, very Mad Max sort of thing, that it kind of culminated in Gorka Morka rather than started there.
Well, I remember just watching a bunch of our reports. I think the second most frequently asked questions is, why did you not let anybody win ever? And you just crushed everyone all the time.
Well, I was hungry. I will say that much when it came to gaming back then. I've learned a little bit more balance, shall we say, now. But I was really hungry back then to win games. And if I'm honest, when you do a battle report, it's not like playing a normal game.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of distraction all the time. You have to stop every turn, take pictures, make notes, etc. People are coming up all the time because it's fun, it's interesting, and you're playing it in the studio. There's loads of other people around. They're all interested in the game, and you're playing with their painted miniatures in some cases and stuff like that. So they will look in on what's going on, and you get a big peanut gallery going with, oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you, etc. So it's a huge quantitative distraction. And basically, the only reason I won so many games is because I was less vulnerable to the distractions than Jervis was. He was, if to this day I believe this, he's a better player than me. He always came in with a great army list and a good plan and all this sort of stuff. And we used to play a lot as well outside of battle reports. Even before, we'd play multiple times a week, quite often, especially in the early days. And more often than not, he beat me. But in battle reports, he invariably lost. And
at some point, it just happened.
It took me for a while to realize what was going on, and Jervis just can't take the distraction during the game. He loses control of his plan, and he just comes back and sort of makes a few moves, sort of thing. But his head's just not in the game, and my head was always in the game. And I was all like, stop distracting me. I don't care. Whatever. I'm going to do it anyway, and all the rest of it.
So where Andy got the idea of just inviting more and more people around the table. Hey, I'm playing Jervis.
I hated it, man. I hated the peanut gallery with a royal passion. I really did.
So there are a couple of really good questions that folks have sort of thought of, and I thought I'd kind of go through a few of them, and we'll kind of discuss them. At your leisure, of course.
Paintbrush working though.
Oh, that's right. We are doing some painting. Why don't we tell folks what we're working on? That's part of the whole like dynamic we have here. I'm clearly too focused on asking questions, and I'm not going to do any helping today.
I'm way too focused on answering them as well. There we go.
However, you do have something on the side just in case, which is...
Oh, for me? I am painting some World War II aircraft today. I have some Ju-88s, Junkers 88 bombers. These are for Blood Red Skies, a World War II historical fighter combat game of my own creation, which I'm a great fan of. I've got some Messerschmitt 109Gs as well, much smaller single-engine fighters, as you can see there. And I'm kind of partway through these, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to pick up and do a bit more on them. I'm not terribly happy with how they're going. You have this great vision of how things are going to look when you start painting it, and it never looks that way. So I'm at that point with them, really. So
we have a very good solution to all of those problems, Mr. Andy, and that's to just put paint on it.
Yeah,
shameless plug. If you're looking for a copy of Blood Skies, you can go to jacksonqueen.com.
As a point of interest, point of order, the starter set for Blood Red Skies is now sold out. Haha. So if you have got a starter set, the Battle of Britain starter set, then it's actually quite saleable now because they're hard to come by. You can, of course, buy the rules in the Airstrike book instead, which is now freely available, which includes cards and things like that too.
And it is a really fun game. I've seen a variety of people play it, and every time I'm like mesmerized. I'm like, that's so cool. I love, World War II, like anything, like Battlefield Gothic, for example, is like my favorite ship game, and I know we've talked about it. You never really kind of got the opportunity to sort of like work on Battlefleet 2, like Gothic 2 or whatever, and then it turned into like a video game, and then you worked on like Drop Fleet Commander, which
That's right.
which was I feel like you got to work on a lot of the concepts for spaceship combat games that you didn't get to work on like Battlefleet Gothic, which is more of like a naval combat game in space, really.
Yeah, Drop Fleet's more like a modern naval combat game in space, if I'm entirely honest. But it's consciously got a more kind of high-tech sci-fi feel to it over Gothic, where, as I always tell people, I mean, the aim with Gothic was to make Space Battle of Jutland. Nothing really any later than that. And for those of you who aren't history nerds, the Battle of Jutland was a World War I battle, not World War II. So things like carrier aircraft and torpedoes, even stuff like that, were a gleam in the eye at the time. So it was basically big battleships throwing shells at each other was the whole dynamic of the battle. So that was more the kind of like the aim point than anything whizzy and more modern. Whereas, as I say, Drop Fleet has more of a relationship into Harpoon, which is a modern naval combat game.
That makes more sense. Now, what Parrot Project on Reddit asks. He says, "What are some of your favorite rules you designed?" And to follow that up, do you play any of your older games that you had designed just as like a, nostalgic?
With older games, it tends to be the case that I play a lot of them over the course of the design process, and some afterwards. But years later, I've gone back and played a few, like Battlefield Gothic, for example. I've played that a few times in the subsequent terrifyingly long period of time since I designed it. But generally, I'm playing whatever the new thing is that I'm working on. Right now, Blood Red Skies. Blood Red Skies, I keep going back to because it's got what I consider some quite genius mechanics to it, and I really like it for its it's really slick and simple to pick up. It's one of those real classic, easy to learn, difficult to master sort of games. So that's
I love that style of game.
It's always the goal, really, when you're trying to design a game is, because the first barrier for entry for anyone is actually just playing the damn thing, so you don't want to make it so hard that you can't get into it in the first place.
Yeah.
But you want something that once you get into it, you can go, because it's got hidden depths to it.
Makes sense. And it's those little things that then can separate like the master from just somebody who's picking up the game. So you can have fun with the game because it's you're shooting planes down or whatever. But then when it comes to really understanding like what the best angles are, elevations, like weapons versus this, and I think that sort of mastery of a game, because of the love of the game more than anything, I think really kind of bleeds through when there's a good game mechanic built in, which is really nice.
Yeah, and it was funny, specifically going from doing Battlefleet Gothic to many years later doing Dropfleet Commander. Looking at it, both games now with a bit of distance from them, I did some things in Battlefleet Gothic better than I did in Dropfleet Commander. It's not continuous upward progress all the time. There were definitely a few steps backwards in there where I should have known better and things like that. But I do consider myself very lucky to have had the opportunity to work on 2 spaceshipy games because I do love spaceship games.
And then there was StarCraft 2, in which you were like the lead story designer, basically.
Yeah.
Which I'm a huge StarCraft fan, and I also have friends. I have a couple of friends that work in like stories for video games, and it's a lot of work. And that's like a franchise where you wanted to that's got like a storied history as well as any other franchise, and there's a lot of weight on your shoulders to sort of like carry it. And in my opinion, it was done really successfully. Like StarCraft 2 is, just as, if not more popular than the original StarCraft because it was so loyal to that sort of game design and game mechanics but different enough to make it warrant the difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was when I was working there at Blizzard, there was kind of huge consciousness with all the guys working on StarCraft 2 that they had a legacy to embrace because StarCraft 1 was such a popular game with Brood War in particular. And they were very aware of that and very aware that they were treading on sacred ground to a large extent, and they had to produce something that would, at the very least equal it and perhaps better it. But that would be disrespectful to try and better it, so at least equal it.
Yeah.
But what it certainly couldn't do was fall short of what the previous game was, because it became very apparent at the point where they went to go and do the announcement for it. They'd hold a big tournament in Korea every year.
Yeah.
No, actually, it was all over the world. It just happened to be in Korea that year, which is part of why they made the announcement there. And we went there, and they've hired out the Olympic Stadium there at Seoul. I kid you not. It's
massive.
Full.
Massive. Yeah.
It's a massive thing. Multiple arenas and different areas.
Oh, yeah.
Here's the place they do the cycling, and here's the place they do the gymnastics. All of it full.
Of StarCraft people.
From StarCraft. Well, Blizzard fans in a general sense.
Yeah,
they were also into the fantasy side of things too. But broadly there, it was just a buzz, and they're holding competitive tournaments there in the whole 9 yards. And you're like, oh my, okay, this is serious business. And you go back to your hotel at night, and there's 2 channels of StarCraft on the TV with competitive tournaments being held, and you start to realize that it's a really big deal. And you've got a lot to live up to overall, so put your best foot forward.
Yeah, that's
Amazing stuff, really.
oh, and and it's like I've got some. I grew up with a couple of really good Korean friends in like the international school I was at, and that's where I really kind of
Mm.
found love for StarCraft. But when I found
Mm.
out that it was more than just a game. There was like tournaments, and that was like my first foray into what would be considered like esports, right? And that
Yeah.
was realizing that was eye-opening for me, many
Yeah,
years ago.
absolutely. The point whereby it's so serious that they have teams that live in a house together. They do nothing but play StarCraft all the time against each other to speed themselves up and all this sort of thing. It's dead serious. It's like sumo teams or something like that.
Yeah.
These young men, intense young men. So yeah. Just coming onto that from having just like worked on White Dwarf and done 40K for years and things like that, and there are events and stuff like that you went to, and there's lots of people there, but just an entirely different scale. It really was.
Yeah, especially back then. I guess nowadays like Warhammer's sort of like making its way into more mainstream sort of media
Oh yeah,
sources and
big
stuff
big
like
time,
that.
big time.
And so, I guess each sort of company will have its like growth and like ups and downs and different sort of like demographics and whatnot that they end up sort of catering to or whatnot. I did want to take a minute to go over some of the chat. Hello, everybody. Diago, Yarum, CSR, Gearguts, Flood of Red, Psycho Squirrel. It's a fantastic screen name.
Hi,
Diego
Natalie.
Sanchez. Tanya's like, that's Natalie.
That's my bestie.
Adrian says he has so many memories of he has so many memories of reading White Dwarf where Andy just never lost. I think that's funny. We went over that. Gaia says, you're the reason, Andy, that I got into 40K in 1996-ish. I've been hooked to it ever since, and if I'm being asked why not play another tabletop, I always say it doesn't have Marines, Eldar, etc., etc. It's just so good at its lore, and that's thanks to Andy, amongst others. Like, lore is such an important part of a game, right? Like, I feel like, when you're developing a game in general, do you find it easier to sort of develop a game that is based off of like a historical narrative that kind of gives you that sort of, hey, well, it's already like we know what happened, that sort of thing? Or do you find it more easier or more creative to kind of work with like an expanse of like sci-fi, for example?
One of the things I tell my clients these days is the most terrifying words in the world to me are "we could do anything," because that just means you don't know what you want to do.
Right.
So I tend to like to try and nail things to some sort of a historical kind of outlook or basis. I mean, I dinged on about Battlefleet Gothic earlier on and basing that as being Space Battle of Jutland. I mean, it's not, but that was kind of to get an angle on it.
Yeah.
And I feel you always want something like that. You need something like that, because if you are just trying to pluck things entirely out of the air, it's going to lack my favorite word that I love to unleash on people: verisimilitude.
Oh no, consider the word unleashed.
It's a $5 word if you ever heard one. Huh? What it means
that'll
is
win you some Scrabble games.
Absolutely, if you could get that one away. What it means is truth, truthiness, as the Colbert Report likes to put it. And that's really what you're always trying to evoke in, a piece of fiction or a game or anything like that, is a sense of truth about it. That you can buy into it, that you can believe Eldar and Space Marines and Orcs exist, and that they live this way and they fight this way, because there's a sense of grounding to it, rather than this just sort of like, well, it's all just like different colors of candy floss, really. You just pick what you like. And I've got no time for that at all. I really don't. It's like, no, nail me down, give me facts.
Give me something like a very and I will work within this framework and make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the interesting things actually about moving over to work at Blizzard, because I'd gone there from having spent 14 years at Games Workshop, writing manuals and books and games, and most of which were set in the same universe, or the same two universes if you count Warhammer Fantasy as well. Well, all of them were set in that the same reality, and it was always a conscious, you're always trying to build it outwards or fill bits in, or at least open doors in a new and interesting direction. And I get to Blizzard, and they've got this tremendously successful StarCraft 1, Brood War, and there honestly isn't that much background to it.
Yeah, it's very, very straightforward. You've got like Outer Planets, and
yeah.
then there's like military experiment gone wrong, and then the Protoss
Yeah,
get involved.
it's way more like, and I don't want to sound like I'm denigrating it either, because basically it comes from a different place.
Yeah,
they're interested in giving you like a movie or a comic book kind of experience where it's like, okay, I get that, the story's going on here and so forth. It's not massively layered in terms of like all these planets and moons and internecine wars that we talk about in the past and things like that, because it's very rooted in the here and now.
right.
And it's about characters and events rather than about history. So to me, it was like, oh my God, there's virtually no history here at all. As I understand it, what there is, a universe that's been built, and it's kind of a bit like a theater set, where if you look behind something, there's nothing there. It's just sort of like, this is the moon, this is a tree, because that's how computer games are put together.
I guess that must feel a bit liberating as well, being like, you can just focus on like what they want the audience to sort of see or buy into.
This is it. You aren't so bound. I mean, we were bound to a certain extent because of StarCraft 1 and what had happened in that and so forth. But compared to what I was used to, it was, pretty gloves off, really, in terms of what you could do next.
Which is awesome. Yeah, I've always and then we go into like book writing, right? So you've done like you've worked on many rules, you've worked on lots of different game systems, and you've also dabbled in like writing like novels. One of my favorite books has been like The Path of the Archon, which in my opinion was like one of the first times, or the first time, that like anybody had really taken a deeper look into like the history background and sort of like, social structure of the Dark Eldar, which is of course like the main faction that I sort of really am akin to in the 40k universe, as crazy as that sounds, considering they're like all crazy sadistic pirates. But I just want to say that, in that sense, do you like, what about writing a novel? What draws you to that aspect of sort of like story creation?
It's another big contrast, and that was one of the reasons I was keen to try it. Was, when you work on a game, you're always to a certain extent working in a team, whether it just be with sorry guys, importantly with artists and miniature designers and so on, and obviously the people who are incepting and bringing together the game, because it's a physical product, so it has to be marketed and la 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 la. You write a novel, you don't have any of that. It's you and a keyboard. That's it. No other external pressures whatsoever, apart from maybe from your editor a little bit, but probably not. So it's kind of terrifying in its own way. You're swimming into deep waters on your own, and you can easily get stuck out there. So it was a really kind of liberating experience, a kind of terrifying experience at the same time, because no one's going to come help you. It all comes from you. And every day you've got a sort of like, I need to write this many words. It's a mountain to climb.
Right.
And my hat's off. It made me really appreciate the successful novelists I know, the guys I've worked with in the past in particular, people like Graham McNeil and Gav Thorpe, who've, written literally tens of novels at this point, because it's a real skill. My, it is such a skill.
I've I always admired that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, I'm rambling on. One thing I did want to say,
I love it,
was when it comes to Dark Eldar in particular, I give a lot of credit to Phil Kelly, actually, who wrote the Dark Eldar Codex, because he gave me an early draft of it when I started writing the Dark Eldar books. And that was, again, it gave me that sort of grounding to work from. And that was tremendously useful, just so powerful in and of itself, because he did a great job of, outlining a lot of the stuff about Kamara and how the different cabals worked and things like that. So all I had to do was take what he'd written already and run with it, and sort of like put you in the boots, put you in the pointy shoes, the pointy shoes of bottom kicking of Dark Eldar, and make a story around that, which wasn't so bad really.
Yeah, and like the 13 Foundations of Vengeance and all that stuff. Like that's just stuff that
Yeah.
really has stuck with me over my career as a Dark Eldar player, or just somebody who, you're talking about being able to sort of really step into, the shoes of like that story, whatever. That really, really, like even the banquet hall, like that's probably like one of my favorite scenes in like the whole book was when he's doing like a banquet, right? And they're like, spoilers, of course, for anybody who hasn't read the book yet. But the whole point is it's all an outward show of like, this is how powerful I am, and they like it's like hundreds or thousands of people at this banquet or whatever, how big it is, and that every piece of cutlery is from like a different civilization from the universe, right? Being like, I've raided everything.
Yeah.
I was like, that just left like an impression of me being like, yeah, it doesn't have to be uniform. It's not like, oh, prime and proper, I've got like a knife and fork or whatever. It's no, I've got like an orc spork and an imperial knife or whatever, and that imagery just stuck with me. So yeah, it's very, very
well,
powerful.
once again, it comes down to that sort of like when you think you have that great power and all that sort of thing, what is going to impress at that point? Gold, jewels, fancy precious metals? Nah, not really. Everybody's got that in spades. What's really impressive is like, here's my track record, here's my orc spork and all the rest of it.
Exactly. Right.
That's how you one up other people. Going, have you got an orc spork? I don't think you do you?
Nope. Exactly.
And then with Dark Elder, the next thing you know, then there's suddenly like a fight on between them all to destroy every other orc spork in the universe, so that he can own the only one that's left.
And they would be that petty as well.
Yeah,
They literally go around like wiping out every orc spork in existence in the entire universe just to prove a point.
Yes.
So Speed Racer says that pointy shoes of bottom kicking is his new war cry. So I actually love the Mask of Vile the best. Such a good little story.
That was a real pleasure to do, actually, because I did it quite a while after I'd finished the Dark Eldar trilogy. And, I'd always enjoyed playing around with the character of Motley. And I'd always kind of wanted to do a spin-off with him more in his natural environment, really, rather than being a Deus Ex Machina sort of a character. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed that, and I think it's tidy. It's about the right length for what it is, and all the rest of it, and it just came off well. I was happy with that one.
Yeah, I remember because there was the 3 short stories that sort of accompanied the Path of the Archon. Is that right?
You're asking me now. I can remember.
I just
remember
remember
at least 2. So
yeah,
probably 3, yes.
Yeah, I believe it was 3. I'm pretty sure it was.
There was Midnight on the Street of Knives. Was the first Dark Eldar story I wrote, short story. So I remember that one. I did another one called Bellathonus and the Shadow King, which kind of follows that.
Shaddam, right? They go into Shaddam and do the Shaddam stuff, yeah.
And then there was another one as well, so the Treasures of Somewhere and Another. Which is kind of related, but not so directly to the others.
All right. Anyway, anybody who hasn't read all those stories, like, make sure you do. They are like canon for us Dark Eldar players at this point. So make sure that you go check them out and read them and be inspired. Kayla says, my question for Mr. Chambers is, which character from 40k would you meet if there was no fear of getting murdered? And what would be your first question to that character?
Wow. Okay, I'll give you my gut instinct answer when you ask that question, especially when you put on the appended, and not be murdered. It was actually Fabius Bile.
Oh, he was. That's an interesting.
That's
choice.
a good answer.
Yeah.
And what would you ask?
He's an interesting character. What I would ask him? can you make me immortal? Can you grow my hair back?
Sold. I want to know too.
He'd be like, "Take this concoction," and you're like, "Oh, maybe."
Yeah, you won't turn into a 500-pound mutant at all. No. You'll have great hair.
No, it'd just be a hairy mutant at that point. Be like, "Aren't you happy you have hair again?"
Yes, everything you asked for.
Fabius Bile is a really fascinating character, says Red Badger. Yeah, I've always found good characters be the same. We also had another question in chat. Says, "What's your favorite World War II plane, and why is it the Messerschmitt 2.0 or something like that?" Hold on a second.
I'm intrigued as to why he's claiming might be my favorite.
You're
sailing into dark waters, my boy.
Yeah. So why is it the Messerschmitt 262? He's
262. Well, it's not actually the 262. That's the jet fighter that you've doubtless seen at some point.
Of course.
Famously in a Blue Oyster Cult album. No, he's actually the Focke-Wulf 190. Is my favorite World War II fighter.
Is that just because of the look, or
some of it's the look? It's very pugnacious looking. Some of it's just solid characteristics. It's really robust, well built, well armed, agile, fast. Just a great all rounder in general, and it's very disloyal of me being British to like it, because it kicked the crap out of the RAF when it first showed up. It was sort of great upset when it first showed up, and it fought on through the entire war. It's just a really great design in my book. Okay, flown by evil Nazis, it must be said, but overall, it's like the best all-rounder fighter to me in the Second World War.
Very nice.
I would like to take this moment to actually congratulate Ridvin for actually doing hobby.
Oh, well, you know how hard it is to do this and ask questions at the same time? And, not just be like, squee!
I want to take the opportunity to say how this chat has not been derailed.
It has not been derailed. We are
not that happens on a regular basis or anything. But.
We're behaving.
Oh, well done. You guys are being very quiet. Actually, you're giving me all the airtime.
It's because we're really inappropriate normally.
You're on best behavior, huh?
Yeah.
Well, it's I told them, I was like, "You don't mess this up."
You two, shut up.
Pretty much.
Don't embarrass me.
This is
pretty much.
They would have to try really hard to embarrass me, as I tend to embarrass myself a lot of the time.
Also, you have
get in
line. Roxy says, "I'm here to derail things." Very, very fun.
She is. Better watch out for that one.
Cheeky desk nurgling says, "I'm working on my Death Guard. Can't wait to get my hands on the new codex." Speed Racer says, "What inappropriate?"
I may or may not got them today.
Fancy.
Go on, you need to get the plug in. Now in stock at my store.
Now in stock at Jack's on Queen.
Not until Saturday.
Okay.
So
what pre-orders now?
So Andy, are you currently working on sort of any projects that you can discuss at all, or any new things? Do you have a blog and stuff, don't you, where you write articles and things, or is that something?
No, I should have.
Okay.
I should have, but I am too scared and lazy to actually keep it together and actually have a blog. I have a page on Facebook, Andy Chambers, where basically I tell people things like, "Oh, hey, I'm going to be appearing on a live stream." And sometimes post something more interesting than that, but rarely, to be honest. So, no, people get this impression that I'm tremendously elusive, and I'm not. I'm just bad at social media, basically.
It is definitely a complete like it's to do it properly. You sort of have to almost sell your soul to it, which can be good and bad. Um, and in terms of projects, you currently like writing a book or developing a new game.
I currently have 4 projects ongoing. Let me see. Which ones can I talk about?
And that's all we can know.
Yeah, I haven't asked them to say anything. I'm working on a skirmish game.
Very cool.
For tabletop, 28 mil,
Nice.
sort of post-apocalyptic. Very small model count is the interesting draw on this game. It's intended to have like 3 models a side at the base.
Now you've also worked on Frostgrave, just on a side note. Is that right?
I did some scenarios for the guy. He got in touch with me. He was very lovely and sort of said, "Oh, we're gathering up, material to do an expansion book and asking different people what I've always liked to, write a scenario or what have you. So would you write a scenario?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'll be fun." Got some free Frostgrave books out of it, so that was all right.
Very nice.
I love Frostgrave. It's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah, and that's kind of one of the inspirations for this thing I'm working on now is a similar sort of like, I don't know, scale of game. So it's very skirmishy, very sort of character, almost semi-RPG come dungeon crawly for a tabletop game, which is
like,
great. It's interesting.
Like Hero Quest. Without the board.
I hesitate to without the board, yeah, and without the fantasy elements, and without this, and without that, and without the other. But there is kind of like treasure, in a way, and so on. And like I say, it's limited characters in effect. So that's where I start to get, it's almost an RPG. But it also needs to have the facility for other things being in it as well. So kind of an interesting one. Really.
I'm looking forward to it. And how long does it take to sort of, from like inception to sort of development production? Is it like a couple of year process? Is it, does it take about 6 months to really kind of hammer down a lot of the core principles, and then the rest is, production? Like in terms of a game of that scale, like what would the turnaround be for its sort of like development? Just out of curiosity.
What it tends to work out to is it's usually spread out over a year or 2 years in terms of how long you're working on it for, just because of all the other bits that need to come into motion and connect up and so on. In terms of actual work for me, it's about 3 or 4 months to actually write a game from beginning to end. But it's kind of not. It needs to be spread over about 6 to 8 months doing that. Because it's not like you can just sit there and burn it out. You need to do a bit, fiddle around with it, do a bit more, fiddle around with that, do a bit more, fiddle around with that, put it together, go, oh my God, these things don't work together at all, change everything. It's a process.
And do you have like a series of friends or a team of people that tend to help you with like developing game mechanics and rules, or like soundboarding ideas, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I've got a few different people that I've variously worked with over the years, or just got to know, that I find quite useful as good sounding boards, I should say, for working on game mechanics. You play it a bit, you play it with yourself a bit, you get other people to play it a bit as well, and pick up on feedback from that. It's particularly tricky at the moment, of course, because you can't actually get together with people and play games, and it's a very kind of hands-on thing.
Just a tabletop game, you want to. It's like it's a very tactile experience, I find. Like
yeah, this is it, and even to the extent where you can send rules out to people and get them to play games and stuff like that, and get feedback from them. But it's always very muted because there's a lot of subtlety that you don't get when somebody's like writing you an email about how their game went and so on. You only really get it from being around the table with them and seeing where they kind of furrow their brows and where they get confused or when they get excited and things like that. So there's no real substitute to doing it in person, unfortunately.
So that's interesting. You like, as a game developer, like you're doing a demo, you give it to 2 people to play. So it's a lot. It's, I guess there's also like you're people watching. Like you're being like, did they find that like an engaging entertainment experience? Like you're looking for.
Are they excited? Are they getting bored? Are they
That's really
confused
cool.
about what happens next, and so on? Is one guy picking it up faster than the other one? If so, why? All that sort of stuff plays into it. Because, as I've explained to people in the past, again, this is a perspective from having worked on computer games a bit as well, because they have their own logic. They have what seems like completely alien logic when you dig into it about how they do things. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors involved. When it comes to tabletop games and stuff like that, you don't get to use software and smoke and mirrors because it's all in here. It's all wetware,
Yeah.
So you have to be able to understand what makes people's brains tick, what makes things memorable to them, what makes things confusing or slow or grindy for them. And it's a very kind of holistic process of trying to figure that out. I'm really overstating it, to be honest, but I do think it's important.
Well, like I guess, to be a good game developer, you also have to be a good sort of like entertainer in that sense. Like you're trying to create something that's going to resonate with
you're
people.
trying to create an experience that people enjoy at the end of the day. And, you've got a certain amount of their attention and time to do that in. So, for God's sake, use it sensibly.
Right.
And don't give them a bad experience. This is the golden lesson I have learned from now over 30 years of developing games. Don't give people a bad experience.
I worked for Games Workshop in the early 90s, and that was one of the things that they always taught us. When you're doing a demo game, pay attention to the players and find out what they like and what they don't like. And what they like, just start to emphasize on it. He's like, if you need to bend rules to make sure that they have a good time, then do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're basically paying attention to what the individuals are doing. And that's really good feedback on how they feel about the game.
Yeah. So this has been the fascinating to develop for me as well, because I've gone from an environment where you put your knowledge out or what you thought was a good idea into the world, basically into a vacuum. We'd get letters, like physical letters, occasionally to White Dwarf, but that was about it in terms of feedback. To now, where everybody, John Chaves, for example, Lumineth Cavalry or the Velociroos or Kangaraptors, you can reach out and just ask a question directly, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. And did you
hear that, John Chavis? Calling you out for your question, by the way. Yes, that's true. In this age of like social media and being able to literally just send like put a post on any sort of like game post, like in any of the developers, to be like, hey, this is trash or this is great or whatever. And and I guess back in the day it was like I remember, there wasn't like we got a codex every like 6 months or every 8 months maybe. And it would take, 5 years to cycle through all the factions. And normally it was like 1 month it was 40k, and then you waited 2 months, and there was a fantasy one, and then you waited like 2 months, and there was a 40k one. It was like back and forth. And nowadays it's like if this instant gratification, it's like if it's not fixed in like 2 seconds, it's terrible, and it's like, well, hold your horses. You know what I mean? Like, enjoy what you get while you get it.
Is this you speaking from like a Reaver jet bike perspective,
or 8-point racks that have 20-man units with feel no pain and 4-up invulnerable saves?
No comment.
Say 10 points again, please. Say 10 points again.
No comment. No comment. Even though I'm exceedingly excited about that mistake. So I have a question, Andy, Mr. Chambers. We look to you as an inspiration for most of our our careers in terms of gaming, right? You've been there at least since I started playing the game. Like you were a very knowable face in White Dwarf and in rules development and in games that inspired me to play and now do gaming as like a full-time hobby job, basically. But who was like your inspiration in terms of like, that got you into gaming in general? Because we're looking to you as an inspiration. What kind of got you going
into gaming in the first place?
Yeah.
I don't know. I created myself, I'm afraid, on that front.
I I have molded myself into the beacon of hobby that I am today.
Well,
That's very fitting.
I was
will
born
say.
in the hobby. I was raised in the hobby.
Right. You have
I-
only, etc. So yeah, I can't really blame anybody apart from because back when I started, like when I was a nipper, right? I can't even remember how old I was. I think 8 at the time, 8 or 10 or something like that. And I first started becoming aware of the fact that fantasy was a thing. The original that we started off was like Airfix Soldiers when I was a real kid and playing some limited games with like the Airfix rules back then. So there was a war games hobby around at the time, but it was very historically based, very limited in outlook, and it was very much kind of more advice for if you wanted to have a game. This whole thing about army lists and bang, 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 that all kind of developed later, a lot more of it, because, you know, it was a gentleman's hobby sort of thing. So there wasn't really an inspirational figure for me at that time. There are ones now that I know the history a bit better, people like Donald Featherstone, who kind of wrote books about how to pursue the wargaming arts, but I didn't get any of that. Grant and Featherstone, thank you. Yes, there we go. There are various great luminaries of the hobby that were around, but I wasn't aware of any of that. So I just sort of like got into the idea of gaming, and there was some stuff on the periphery, but it was very adult, you know, not in the way you're thinking. No.
Derailed. Officially derailed.
I'm glad he
Mr.
recognizes that.
It wasn't for kids. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
No, that's
yeah.
not any better, is it? Anyway. Point being, so you kind of made your own entertainment to a large extent. And what kind of broke through that a little bit was there was a developing sci-fi and fantasy kind of scene of tabletop gaming at the time. I got into, I think, Lord of the Rings, first of all. And then subsequent to that, there was actually a hobby shop, amazingly enough, in Nottingham, Asgard Miniatures it was, sorry. And I started going down there as a little nipper and learned more about sort of sci-fi and fantasy games then. And that's like early 80s, mid 80s. So there's stuff around, but not as we understand it today, really.
Did you find there was back in the day there was a lot more sort of like stigma associated to like war games in that sense?
Oh God, yeah.
You know, yeah.
And sci-fi and fantasy war games in particular, because they weren't proper games. You know, there was just stupid pixie and fairy things. Who the hell would want to play those? So yeah, there was a lot of stigma around it. I mean, God bless them, Asgard very much kicked against that, and they were just like, "No, we like it, so we're going to do it."
Right.
They were quite punk in their outlook about it all, really. And
Hence the
had a decent
handlebar
enough business.
mustache and the long hair.
Yeah, we were all metalheads in there. And, you know, that was kind of the environment I grew up in, very much so. So
Very awesome. So I know we don't have you for very much longer, Mr. Chambers, but you know, of course, if anybody wants to, make sure you head on over to Andy Chambers on Facebook at facebook.com/theandychambers, and make sure you check him out on there as well. You know, of course, we've had our awesome co-hosts here. We've got our Farius Matt from jacksonqueen.com, which you can always check out of there. Make sure you get your copy of Red Blood Skies.
Blood Red Skies.
Blood Red Skies. There you go.
BRS.
Yeah. Right over there. See, official plug. And then Tanya, the War Mistress, on Twitch, streaming Wednesdays and Saturdays. So make sure you check that out as well. And go and hobby, because that's kind of what we do. I've, of course, been Skari the Blade, as my Archon is called. And don't forget to use the hashtag just put paint on it. Like Mr. Chambers, you can too. Just put paint on it. There you go. See, that's how that works. Other than that, I'm going to sort of leave it open to one last question from you know, each of you panelists, if you'd like, Matt or Tanya, if you could ask Andy Chambers a question. What would it be before we finish?
I don't, kind of on the spot. Kind of on the spot.
This is how show business works, Dal.
I guess.
Yeah.
I guess.
It's all like, who is this guy anyway?
Because it's like a topic that's kind of close to my heart. What do you think is like the biggest driver in making the hobby so diverse? Because even when I started about 8 years ago, like the diversity of the people who enjoy the hobby is greatly increased. And what do you think is the main driver for that?
I have had the good fortune to travel all over the world because of the hobby in one way or another. You know, I've been to, let's say, I've been to Korea, been to Poland, been all over the place. A lot of time spent in America, France, Germany, etc. And one thing that's universal is people are actually kind of the same in the fact that they all take great pleasure in being able to paint miniatures and perhaps do something with them. And it's to see that across so many different countries and languages and, you know, different boundaries makes you think there's something universal going on there, that we all get a kick out of this. It's not limited to any one particular country or any one particular culture. And I think that's one of the reasons it becomes so diverse, because, you know, even if you drive into a particular country, it's not going to be, oh, only, you know, punks or metalheads or what have you are into that. It's more diverse than that. So I think it comes from there, is that we all get a kick out of it for whatever reason it is. You know, we sit here with our little brushes and we do models and we put things together and go, oh, neat, I made a thing. And the growth of being able to create electronically and game electronically hasn't actually taken it away. You know, it scratches some of the same itches, but it's not the same.
No.
People still like physical artifacts. They still like physical games. They like getting together one-on-one personally or in groups or what have you. Many times I saw, you know, the doom of all things tabletop predicted on the fact that everybody will be playing PC games by now, but that's not proved to be the case. What it's actually done is added on to rather than taken away from. So I think it's just because one of those things, we're humans, we like the same things.
I actually think that video games are a big driver for getting more diverse people into the hobby, because they're like, one of my first experiences with the hobby was like the Space Marine video game on my PS3, you know, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who that was like one of their first experiences with the lore was through one of the video games. So
yeah, there's more channels there now for it to get out into the world. You know, there's been comic books, there's novels, there's computer games now. Back in the day, it used to be just like what was in the store in a White Dwarf magazine. And there's so many different routes now that you can actually contact people with, and and they hook onto it and go like, oh, that's cool, I like it. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. And Matt?
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
First part is when you finish your skirmish-based RPG game, how do I get a copy of it? And the second part is, how much would it cost to get you personally to come over and demo it for us?
Matt's over here like,
I'll pay for your ticket, he says.
No, but honestly, you don't have to answer that. I just wanted to take the time to thank you so much for everything that you have done. I'm sure that you hear it quite often, but us little guys over here that always look up to somebody appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come hang out with us. I have been playing since the inception of 40K, since Rogue Trader. So you have been a part of my life from very far away for the past, 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years. Scary, isn't it?
It is, yes.
That's true. It's sweet. Thank you. The thing I always tell people is, it's been my pleasure and my great good fortune to be able to fulfill that role, really. It's tremendously humbling how much it has impacted on other people's lives. I've just been trying to produce things that I thought people would enjoy and give them a good experience. I was more driven back in my Games Workshop day about kicking people's asses, but that kind of features into it all as well. You know, that is part of the hobby and part of the pleasure. So yeah, it's honestly, it's been my great pleasure, really has, and I count myself incredibly lucky that I've had the chances I've had to keep doing stuff.
And hopefully we get to see you do stuff for many, many years to come. I, for one, will always be looking forward to your next project. And if you ever write another Dark Eldar novel, I expect a character to be based off of me. I'm joking,
I could
of
give him a
course.
suitably horrible death. It's true.
You should. Just something terrible at the hands of Vect himself. Like, not even trying, just being like,
No.
take
With
him
the
away.
pointy
There's
shoes
something
of butt kicking.
Eaten by Urgles or something
No!
like that. You know?
Actually, that would be my pleasure. The Big Red Bear wants to say thank you, Mr. Chambers, for everything you did. Your input is still some of the greatest contribution to the series. You're the best. Cat on keyboard, says Yarum from his original thing. I just want to say thank you so much, Mr. Chambers, for coming on. It has been an
Can I have
absolute
one last
pleasure.
plug before I go? Actually,
Yes, please. What would you like to promote or anything like that as well?
yeah, I should have thought of this earlier. Actually, when I was like, "Oh, I have 4 things," then I talked about one of them. Just recently, I've dinged on about Blood Red Skies several times over the course of this. We're actually getting a Blood Red Skies digital game on the go.
Ooh,
It'll be
cool.
a Kickstarter to try and earn enough money to do it because it's a very niche hobby thing. But if you have ever really appreciated the games I've done for you in the past or anything like that, please consider us. And please consider lending us a few of your bucks so that we can do Blood Red Skies digital. Because I really like it as a game. I'd love it to get into the digital arena and be on Steam or what have you, so people can play head-to-head competitively, especially right now.
That'd be really cool.
That's my plug and one of those 4 things.
And you'll be posting information on your Facebook page?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So facebook.com/TheAndyChambers. As soon as that Kickstarter goes live, I'm going to make sure that I'm posting it everywhere because I know a lot of people who love playing games and playing games.
Well, in all fairness, that was 50 minutes before the first dad joke came in. So,
why you torture me like this?
And with that, I believe we will conclude today's live stream. I just want to say, on a high note, which was my amazing dad joke. Thank you so much, Mr. Chambers, for coming on. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the channel yet again. Of course, you can always find me and what I do on Patreon if you'd like to support what I do. I'm just right there, and I appreciate all of you out there. Other than that, I've been Skari, your grateful host. This has been Mr. Andy Chambers, Tanya, and Matt. And don't forget to just
put paint on
it, which is the motto of the whole thing. Other than that, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chambers. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody, for watching. You are all amazing. Bye, everybody.